Paul Berger decides to join a retreat program but gets shocked after finding that there's more to the toxins that he released out of his body. In a diner, Paul Berger strikes up a conversation with a stranger. However, the stranger gets bothered by Paul's endless yapping, so he shoots him a death stare. Scared, Paul finally shuts up. Suddenly, the waitress asks him for his order. Paul wonders if she remembers him, but she awkwardly replies that they get a lot of customers, so she's not sure. Just then, she recalls that he used to come with a girl, and he was thinner back then. Paul replies that it was his fiancé, but argues that he didn't gain weight. The waitress laughs, saying that it must be another guy. She asks if he's waiting for someone, and Paul replies no. That night, Paul faces his computer as he chomps on a chocolate bar. As he researches the effectiveness of psychiatry, his neighbors from upstairs loudly copulate. Bothered by the noise, he puts on his earplugs and sleeps on the couch. Later, he wakes up to an advertisement about a free retreat that promises to eliminate the negative toxins from anyone's life. Intrigued, Paul writes down the website mentioned in the ad. The following day, he gets an email from the retreat managers telling him to be at a specific address. He wears a nice suit and prints out an updated photo of himself, which he was also tasked to bring. Later, Paul arrives at the address and waits in a room with other people. Suddenly, a man and a woman enter. They're the hosts, and the woman asks everyone if they're ready to change their lives. Paul enthusiastically raises his hand, but it seems like he's the only one who's excited. The man adds that anyone can leave if they're still doubtful about the program. He doesn't expect anyone to actually go, but an elderly woman doesn't hesitate to walk out on her cane. After this, the hosts talk about the lemon cleanse diet, which was created to rid the body of negative toxins. It was discovered by Ken Roberts, who also happens to be the coach in this so-called retreat. Suddenly, the hosts tell the participants to relax, close their eyes, and think about their pain. Paul breathes heavily as his eyes are closed. However, he gets overwhelmed and opens his eyes in tears. When the hosts ask everyone to share their pain, a young man named Eric volunteers, and the hosts record him for Mr. Roberts to see. However, he shares a story about spreading lies about his friend, which is an obvious attempt to make fun of the program. As Eric takes his seat, his girlfriend Lori hides her face in embarrassment. Because of this, the hosts plead with everyone to be serious because their responses will determine who will proceed in the retreat. Paul raises his hand to go next, but a woman from the back gets called. The man sets up the camera in front of her, and she introduces herself as Maggie. She goes on to share about her 10-year marriage. Her husband wanted kids, but she didn't, and one day, she found that he had blown his head off with a shotgun. When Maggie starts to tear up, the hosts tell her that she can stop sharing now. Paul is urged to talk next. He starts by saying that he lost his job and his engagement didn't work out. However, he begins to babble a lot, causing everyone to feel awkward. After the program, the nurse draws out blood samples from him. He asks how he'll know that he got selected for the retreat, and the nurse replies that he'll get a call. Suddenly, he sees Maggie pass by, so he goes after her. He tells her how sorry he is about her past and how brave she is for sharing about it. However, Maggie bluntly says that she made that up. Hearing this, Paul replies that he also faked his story. Although he wants to chat, Maggie is busy, and she leaves as she receives a call. When Paul arrives at his apartment, he reads about the lemon cleanse diet. Suddenly, he hears the mousetrap snap and the little vermin squeals in pain. He's scared of it, so he calls his neighbor Zatik to kill the rat. Just then, he receives another call, so he drops the current one to answer it. At the same time, Zatik arrives with a wrench, ready to aid his friend. With the screaming rat, his copulating neighbors upstairs, and Zatik, Paul could barely understand the woman on the phone. However, he's able to process that he's talking to the Roberts Institute, and he got selected for the retreat. The woman tells him that he needs to sign some papers and that he'll get picked up later that night. As Paul drops the call, Zatik smashes the rat and tells him that the job is done. Accordingly, Paul heads to the building to sign the papers. As he reads the contract, he learns that there's a possibility of him dying, so he hesitates. When he checks the other folders and sees that Maggie was also selected, he signs the contract and ultimately decides to go. That evening, Paul waits outside his apartment when a black car approaches him. He tries to speak with the driver, but the trunk merely opens itself. With this, Paul loads up his luggage and hops into the car. The drive goes on for a whole night, and Paul eventually falls asleep. The next morning, he finds himself in a retreat center in the woods. The resident butler, Fredericks, greets him. When Paul gets out of the car, he sees Maggie, so he waves at her, acting surprised that she got into the retreat. Suddenly, Fredericks grunts as he lifts Paul's luggage, so he helps him out. He notices a huge scratch on Frederick's arm, so he assumes a cat did it. Frederick immediately pulls his sleeves to hide it and confirms Paul's speculation. Later on, Paul and Maggie wait for the orientation to start. As Paul skims through the manual, he sees Maggie's stunning portrait and guesses that she's an actress. She confirms this and adds that it's an old photo. Just then, the couple from the program appears. Paul wonders why the young man got picked when he shared a ridiculous story. Eric explains that Lori really wanted to join the retreat, but he also talks about how the contract spooked him out. Suddenly, a screaming woman walks towards them with Frederick's tailing behind. He tells them to let it out and scream just like her, so they do as they're told. After this odd activity, the woman introduces herself as Lily and welcomes them to the retreat. She immediately gets down to business and explains that Fredericks will hand them their own cleansing kits. Each kit contains 4 drinks, which they must consume by the end of the day. Each drink was specifically formulated for every participant, so they shouldn't drink one that isn't theirs. After they complete their 4-course cleanse, they'll take additional nutritional supplements, which they'll find in their cabins. They're also not allowed to eat outside foods. Just then, everyone takes a sip of their drink. The taste makes them gag, so Lily comments that the drinks can be strong. She claims that she went through the course too, and it replaced her worries and anxiety with humility and a clear mind. Hearing this, Paul chugs his drink, motivating everyone to do the same. Lily commends them for this and adds that Fredericks is also cleansing with them. Just then, she brings out a voice recording from Ken Roberts, congratulating everyone for making it to the retreat. In his message, he notes how everyone has baggage, and letting it go seems complicated because people become dependent on its familiarity. He admits that the cleansing process won't be easy, but he's proud of what he created. He adds that he's looking forward to seeing them soon. Throughout the day, Lily guides the participants through a series of activities. They perform a blindfolding activity, drink their concoctions, and meditate near the fire. When it's time for them to settle into their own cabins, Paul musters all his courage to drink his last jar. He does this outside and sees Maggie punching her stomach, calling it stupid. Elsewhere, Eric teaches Lori some tricks to finish her drinks. He still doubts the effectiveness of the retreat, but Lori tells him that Roberts helped many people and couples too. Suddenly, Eric whips out some alcohol and offers some to her. Lori blankly stares at him, but he tells her to chill out because he's not an alcoholic. Meanwhile, Paul gets nauseous, so he vomits in the sink. As he goes to sleep after this, something squelches in the sink's pipes. Paul wakes up famished the next morning. However, all there is to eat are vegetable broths, which leads him to think about eating a snack he packed. However, he stays firm and gulps the broth down. Suddenly, he notices that his sink is clogged, and an oozy substance is leaking from the pipes. Paul meets up with the others later that day. Now that they're done with the cleansing process, they'll move on to the elimination process. However, Lori won't be joining them, as she's fallen ill. Because of this, Fredericks pairs up with Eric. In this activity, everyone stares into each other's eyes, and Lily reminds them how hard this action is because after the termination process, they'll learn to do this meaningfully. Later, Paul decides to fix his sink. He removes the pipe and tries to see what's clogging it, but he gets shocked when it pops from the inside. This causes him to drop it on the floor, where he finds a flesh-colored lump coming out of it. Cautious, Paul grabs a broom and pokes it. When it moves and reveals its face, Paul zooms out of his cabin and heads to Lily. He tells her that something came out of him, but Lily assures him that all his questions will be answered when Ken arrives. With nothing to do, Paul observes the little creature that night. Oddly enough, its weird face seems to grow on him, and it even shows affection as it touches his finger. The next day, Paul sees Maggie returning from her morning run. However, she suddenly collapses, so Paul rescues her and takes her to her cabin. When she wakes up, they hear something cooing from under the sink. Maggie is scared, and Paul is surprised that she hasn't seen hers yet. Before showing the creature to Maggie, Paul warns her that it can be weird at first. After seeing it, Maggie packs her things to leave. However, Lily stops her outside and convinces her to stay, assuring her that everything is perfectly normal. Elsewhere, Eric gives water to his creature, which he seems to have bonded with, and calls it a little version of him. Meanwhile, Paul passes by Frederick's cabin when he hears a loud noise. He goes inside to check on him and finds that the place is a mess. To his horror, Frederick's creature has grown massive, and he explains that he doesn't have the courage to do it. He doesn't explain what he means by this, but he adds that he needs to do it on his own. That night, Paul stares at his creature, which has already grown twice its size. Suddenly, Maggie knocks on the door, saying that her creature keeps crying and hiding under the sink. Paul goes with her, but he takes his creature with him. In Maggie's cabin, Paul tries to lure her creature with some chocolate, but it's still very cautious. Suddenly, Paul's creature moves, and Maggie is shocked that it has teeth. Just then, the creatures start calling out to each other, so Paul puts them closer together. However, Paul's creature growls at Maggie's. As if her motherly instincts are triggered, Maggie grabs her creature and holds it to her chest. She finds everything strange, but she's changed her mind about her creature. Meanwhile, Lori is still sick in bed. Eric arrives cranky because Lori never finished her cleanse. He shares that he has eliminated so many times and he feels great. Lori argues that she couldn't finish her cleansing concoctions because he drank them too. Eric says she's just jealous, so Lori reminds him that they came to the retreat to fix him. Suddenly, Eric's creature growls, and he gets worried as it seems to be eating its own hands. Meanwhile, Paul and Maggie notice that their creatures are imitating their mannerisms. They then start talking about their lives, but Maggie doesn't want to discuss her acting career, so Paul goes first. He shares how he lost his job at the same time that his fiancé stood him up at the altar. He thinks Maggie is brave for pursuing her acting dream, but she laments that it's just full of disappointment. Suddenly, his creature starts growling, so he tries to comfort it. However, it nips his finger and starts crying. The next day, Ken Roberts arrives at the retreat center. Meanwhile, Paul wakes up to their creatures sitting together, and he's glad they didn't hurt each other and didn't grow any bigger. Suddenly, Lily knocks on the door. When she sees the creatures, she reminds them about the limited lifespan of red and white blood cells as their bodies are constantly changing. She believes it's comforting to think that nothing is permanent. After this, she tells Paul and Maggie that Roberts has arrived to help them finish their cleanse. She also reminds them to take the creatures with them. Later, the two walk towards an open field with a bonfire. There, they overhear Roberts speaking to Eric about his double cleanse, urging him to follow through with something to fix things. Upon seeing them, Roberts greets them. He asks them about their thoughts regarding the cleansing process, and Paul expresses how upset he is that he hid the part about the creatures. This baffles Robert, so he asks to speak with Paul privately. He then talks about his own pain, like how he was laughed at by the medical community. Suddenly, he expresses his sympathies about Paul's failed relationship and asks if he has drawbacks, relationship-wise. Paul replies that people have said that they feel suffocated by him. Upon saying this, he ponders over the thought. Suddenly, Roberts excuses himself to work with Eric before moving to the final stage of their cleansing program. Later on, Roberts blindfolds Maggie and Paul in the middle of the woods. Before starting the final process, he removes Paul's blindfold, urging him to watch to prove that his methods work. He then forces Maggie into a personal reflection, which reveals her true purpose for joining the retreat. He knows that she fabricated the story about her husband, so Maggie comes clean and says she doesn't like how she looks. She wants to lose weight to bag a role because she's struggling with self-validation. As she starts crying, Roberts removes her blindfold, revealing her creature with a knife before it. He explains how the cleansing juice expelled all the negativity from her life, and it was put into her creature. Now that she has reached the final step, she has to kill the creature to be free. However, she can't bring herself to do it, so she leaves. Against Robert's command, Paul puts her creature in a bag along with his and goes after Maggie. However, he fails to catch up with her. That night, he attempts to go to Maggie's cabin, but his attention turns to a sobbing from Eric's place. There, he sees Eric weeping over Lori's corpse. He says she failed to finish her cleanse, and this damaged her insides and caused her death. After this, Paul heads to Maggie's cabin and tells her that they need to leave now. As they're on their way out, Roberts and Lily catch up to them. The man knows they heard about Lori, but he clarifies that it's the result of not following the instructions. He'll allow them to leave, but they must surrender the creatures. He even hands Paul his car keys. However, Paul asks what they'll do with the creatures. Robert says it's complex, and Lily adds that they're not strong enough to finish. With this, Robert admits that he never got to finish his own cleanse, so Lily did it for him. He asks for the creatures again and promises to shut the program down. Suddenly, they hear Frederick's being attacked by his own creature, so Paul grabs Robert's keys and flees. In his cabin, Frederick's lifeless body gets dragged by his creature. Meanwhile, Paul and Maggie drive away with theirs. On the road, Maggie considers killing the creatures to prove that the cleanse is real, but Paul refuses as it could make things worse. When Maggie checks on the creatures, one of them bites her hand, which distracts Paul and causes them to crash into a tree. Shortly after, Paul wakes up from the collision and sees Maggie trying to kill the creature with a rock. He gets out of the car to stop her but sees that both creatures have merged into one. Finally realizing what to do, Paul chokes the creature and Maggie helps him. They both cry trying to do this, but they manage to get through it. When the creature dies, Maggie runs into Paul's arms for comfort as they mourn about letting go of their pain.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.